From KLCC Studios, this is Oregon on the Record.
I'm Michael Dunn. Like something out of Gulliver's Travels, tiny dwellings are springing up around the community and the state. These villages of small huts to fully functional homes are fast becoming one part of our collective effort to both combat houselessness and also the overall unaffordability problem when it comes to enough houses to accommodate everyone. Today on Oregon on the Record, we'll talk to experts in the tiny home movement, from those who develop and manage these villages to tenants who've used them to leave a life on the streets. We'll also talk to the City of Eugene administrator who sees them as part, but only part, of the solution towards our housing crisis that permeates every aspect of our community. These tiny home villages have faced a number of obstacles, from zoning issues to NIMBYism, but they've also defied expectations by creating a true sense of community where there was once just hopelessness. Depending on the chosen definition, a tiny home is somewhere less than 400 square feet, and variations of it can even be as small as 60 square feet. And a tiny home can serve different needs. For some, a tiny home is a permanent residence for people who've downsized their lives and downsized their spending. For others, a tiny home is a temporary, clean, and safe shelter from homelessness. In either case, by shrinking a living space, the tiny home movement is one part of how Oregon and other states are rethinking solutions to housing affordability and homelessness. Often grouped in tiny home villages, they can offer the full spectrum of shelter, but they also face scrutiny from neighbors as well as zoning and other municipal challenges. Today on Oregon on the Record, we'll talk about tiny homes in our state and talk to the people who run them, the City of Eugene department that helps plan for housing, as well as a couple of tenants who believe their tiny homes change their lives forever. Our first guest is an urban planner from the City of Eugene who sees tiny homes as a part of the overall mosaic of strategies to help solve our crisis in homelessness. Annie Lowe, urban design planner with the City of Eugene, thanks for jumping on and talking with us.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. As a planner, generally speaking, talk about how you and the city planners, how do you plan for housing outside of, say, traditional single-family homes or multi-dwelling units, outside of houses and apartments and condos and stuff? What are your plans? How do they take into account something like tiny homes or accessory dwelling units?
Yeah. So, the approach that the city is taking, as well as partners even beyond the city, is really to look at it in a holistic way. So what are the different types, what are the different strategies, what are the different incentives that all can sort of compose themselves into a kind of a good toolkit that would help us throughout the community tackle the housing crisis. So it's really taking a broader approach and looking at the different needs, looking at the different type of land supply that we have, and really layering all that information onto each other to say, okay, well, we have these areas that are prime for high density, really dense urban infill. We have a lot of R1 zoned
residential one.
Residential one zone properties that potentially with the state. There was a state bill that was passed in 2017 that really was built to help create more housing opportunities, and out of that came a whole host of different strategies that would help create more housing opportunities. So, all of those pieces together really set us up and set up the community and communities throughout Oregon to say we need to get creative and we need to look at this in a broader way and try to come up with a suite of housing strategies that will help us move the needle.
Okay. And is getting creative, do sort of tiny home villages, do they fit into that sort of creativity, maybe out of the box thinking with regard to urban planning?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is. It certainly is out of the box, and I can specifically speak to the ADUs, to the accessory dwelling unit.
Okay.
But the accessory dwelling unit program itself is super creative, and it is novel in that it kind of the spirit of it, the essence of it, is that it allows not just developers and not people that are focused on high density, bigger housing developments, or high density or bigger housing developments, but anyone who owns a property to build an ADU on their property, which really in turn is almost like a crowdsourcing effort, in that we are able to all have access to, again, helping manage this housing crisis. And that, that notion that we have now opened up this opportunity for anyone to help, anyone that owns a property or is a homeowner, the ability to build an ADU and help in that is really a super unique and awesome component.
This might be more of a philosophical question, but certainly as a planner, you might be able to lend some ideas. It seems like, over the last century or so, especially here in the West, the American way of building has been build bigger and bigger houses. And I'm wondering, is there, especially with our housing affordability and homelessness crisis, is there a kind of a retreat from that idea and looking at, no, actually, we need to build smaller units or more dense housing because, having one house sit on a huge piece of property, that creates its own problems. I just kind of wanted to get your read on that.
Yeah, no, it is a philosophical question, and it's one that's being asked all over, throughout communities across the country, and I think you're onto something in that, the data is there, that it is more costly to continue to build out, in that we're continuing to have to pull utilities and pull that infrastructure further and further and further out. We're lucky. It's we're in Oregon with our land use laws and the goals that we've created that help to direct our decisions from a land use perspective. Instituting the urban growth boundary, is something that has allowed us to focus on more denser development. And then there's always this massive supply and demand issue that's happening. There are a lot of different kind of like variables within that larger problem that keep churning up this idea, like, how do we develop in a way that's affordable and that allows people to get into the housing market, or helps to promote housing security.
Sure.
And I'm not someone to try to predict the future, but this is going to take a long time to get perfectly right, and it's going to take a lot of different perspectives and a lot of people will need to be involved, and it's a huge investment from a community aspect to kind of try to strike that balance of developing in a smart way that is good for, or as best as it can be on our environment, as well as providing affordable housing. And with that, you have to be willing to build up instead of out, and look at the economics behind why, and follow that, because it seems like it would be easier to continue to build single family housing outwardly, but there are a lot of economics behind and supporting a denser infill.
Yeah. Well, it's obviously, it might be the challenge of our time and age, certainly housing.
Yeah.
It ain't going to be easy. Well,
nope.
Yeah. Well, Annie Lowe, urban design planner with the City of Eugene, really appreciate you coming on and talking with us.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Michael.
I'm Michael Dunn, and you're listening to Oregon on the Record from KLCC and our show about tiny homes. Our next guest runs Square One Villages, whose mission is to create democratic communities with homes that are permanently affordable and environmentally sustainable. Dan Bryant, Executive Director with Square One Villages, thanks so much for talking with us.
Glad to be here.
So you've kind of got both continuum, those who need some stable housing, and then of course people who want to become owners but can't afford our current model, and so there's really both.
Yeah. We're trying to create a particularly on the housing, because that's the ultimate solution, is that we're not going to solve the homeless crisis until we figure out new creative ways of creating more housing that are both a lower cost to construct as well as a lower cost to operate.
Yeah.
And so that's where tiny homes come into play, because just by virtue of size, they're less expensive to build.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about the infrastructure around the units themselves. I mean, do you just need a plot of land, or how does it fit in terms of what you need for the sewer, plumbing, electricity?
Sure. Well, Michael, first of all, our concept is to build a village.
Okay.
Right? Not just standalone homes.
Okay.
So in a sense, a bit of a support community where people can assist each other with whatever their needs may be, giving someone a ride to the doctor, helping out, taking care of the cat when someone is sick, those kinds of things. And then, sharing some of the infrastructure, the cost of the infrastructure. And this is one of the things I learned. It's new because I'm actually a minister by training. I knew nothing about building housing, right? I've had to learn as I go. But
sure.
Obviously, there are economies of scale that come into play when you build tiny homes on a single lot of land. The more you can get on an acre of land, the greater you save, just because of economies of scale. And we discovered this particularly with our Cottage Grove project, where we could only do 14 homes on an acre as opposed to 22 in the Eugene project, and hence the overall cost was significantly higher just due to that loss of economies of scale.
Got it.
But the other infrastructure piece in a tiny home is you need to have a place for events, right? Be that a family event, a birthday party, or be that a board meeting, committee meetings. And so having a common structure that you can use, a sort of a community living room with a full kitchen, laundry facilities, and things of that nature. And plus, your outdoor space also becomes very critical in a tiny home. So giving thought to that outdoor space and having places to gather, places for gardens, things of that nature, all part of that village infrastructure.
Got it. Well, and sort of jumping off of that, what are some of the challenges to your model? I'm thinking about, permitting, siting, how you get the land and that sort of a thing. What are some of the challenges, and how'd you overcome them?
Well, probably the biggest one is just economics, right? Funding.
Sure.
And we have benefited from a lot of generous people in our community. We built our first project, Emerald Village Eugene, with very little public subsidy. The only subsidy was system development charges paid for by the city of Eugene. Oh, that was $120,000, so that was significant. Yeah. But the rest of the $1.8 million, we all, was raised all through charitable giving. I think we had one grant, a foundation grant of about $40,000, but mostly it was individuals. Donor advised funds from various sources. And then after that, some foundations, Meyer Memorial Trust in particular, a number of other foundations that have supported us. And then finally, with our big project, Peace Millage, which is a little under $12 million, we were fortunate to get about $6 million, about half of that from the state of Oregon through the legislature, and using less than traditional means rather than going through the traditional route of funds from Oregon Housing and Community Services, where you're competing against other projects and you're responding to an RFP. We actually got the legislature to designate that funding through a couple of different bills.
Okay.
And that saves you also quite a bit of money. Just anytime you use federal dollars in particular, what's known as low-income housing tax credits, it increases your costs significantly.
Okay.
So that's an additional challenge. So just figuring out that funding piece is huge.
Is your pitch to the legislature or to potential funders, is it that, money in this is actually going to save money down the road because of the crisis of affordable housing?
Absolutely. And for our pitch is that it saves in a couple of different ways. Mm-hmm. Number one, we operate as a community land trust. So any investment into our program is for perpetuity. It will remain in affordable housing forever.
Okay.
So that's first of all, and that's not necessarily true with particularly affordable housing projects that are done by private developers. And God bless them for doing that, right? I mean, it's great that they are putting their effort into that, but once the affordability period ends, they can, if they so choose, convert that to market rate housing. That's not true for ours.
Got it.
Secondly, because of our operation model where the residents actually are operating the housing. So we train them, we work with them to make sure they're following correct procedures, that we are a steward of the property to make sure that it is well cared for and so forth, but still they're operating. So there's no outside landlord, no third party, nobody making a profit.
Okay.
And they set their own budget. They lease the land from us, but then they determine the operating budget henceforth. So just by design then, naturally residents in a co-op like that, because of their own self-interest, are going to want to keep costs at a minimum.
Sure.
So you have that kind of built-in mechanism to make sure it operates most efficiently as possible.
Okay. A word, I think, in any project like this, a word that might crop up is NIMBYism, not in my backyard. Have you faced that, and sort of how have you overcome that?
Yeah, a little bit. Fortunately for us, so far it hasn't been huge. I mean, the first thing we have always done is go into the neighborhood and talk to the appropriate neighborhood council. So in our first project was in the Whitaker neighborhood. So we went to the Whitaker. We actually talked to the Whitaker council before we even talked to a landlord, or a realtor about purchasing the property. And we went to them and said, "Hey, we've got our eye on this particular piece of property, and we want to talk to you about it," and had several meetings with them. And we made some slight modifications as a result of those meetings. So I think they felt listened to. And one of the modifications we made was we invited someone from the Whitaker neighborhood, and actually just down the street from the project, to sit on the interviewing committee that selected the residents, to make sure we were going to get people that are good neighbors. Did the same thing with the Santa Clara project that will be opening in December. And then the other thing, of course, neighbors always want to know, how's this going to affect my property values? So
Sure.
to make sure, and you can't say with any certainty, but I think people can look at our projects and even look at surrounding property values and see that, in fact, it's probably improved their property values, because taking a vacant piece of property, putting something on it that is attractive. We don't build junk. This
Sure.
is not, bad looking. These are attractive projects. And I think, in fact, the great story I love telling was when I was still pastoring the church, I got a call from a member of the church who said, "Hey, I just wanted to know that I had a friend who lives near your project, and she had someone come visit, and this neighbor took this friend who came to visit her and said, 'I want you to come and see this wonderful new project that's in our neighborhood,' and walked them down and showed them Emerald Village. And so that kind of thing just says that, we are seeking to be good neighbors.
Sure.
Living that out.
Dan, my last question for you. It seems that at least up until now, the American way is always build bigger, bigger cars, bigger homes. Is this a way in which to sort of reimagine housing?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and in many ways, we're riding on the on the cusp or the edge of this tiny home movement. That's much larger than any of us here. And the wonderful thing about tiny homes is they are a big part of the solution in terms of climate issues, because a tiny home simply does not use as much energy as a larger home, and you can have a great quality of life. And particularly if you think about the resources that frees up, right, in terms of taking care of your home, paying for it, yard work, and so on and so forth. For those for whom it is sufficient, it can offer a great lifestyle. It really can, and I think our villagers will testify to that in terms of the benefits it provides.
All right. Well, good enough. Dan Bryant, the Executive Director of Square One Villages, thanks so much for talking with us.
My pleasure.
I'm Michael Dunn, and this is Oregon on the Record. Up next, we talk with a group that builds Conestoga-type shelters. They're tiny, only about 60 square feet, but for many who suffer the crushing challenge of homelessness, they're more than big enough to get them through. Heather Quas-Ansa, the Director of Philanthropy, and Tabitha Eck, Director of Operations for Community-Supported Shelters. Thanks so much to both of you for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Yeah, so how do tiny houses, tiny shelters, help both the challenges of houselessness and then also kind of upstream, because we have this larger crisis about housing affordability? Where do you fit into this sort of niche?
So, community-supported shelters. Hold on, let me back up.
Okay.
This is Heather talking.
There you go.
Community-supported shelters, we're known for our Conestoga hut shelters. And they are 60 square foot total space shelters that are easy to put up, easy to take down, and relatively inexpensive to build. Okay. And so in terms of where we fit in the broad scheme of things regarding the housing crisis and folks that are unhoused in our community, we provide alternative shelter to them. So not emergency shelter, not permanent shelter, but that alternative shelter model is what community supported shelters does. Okay.
How long have you been in operation?
This is Tabitha. We actually just celebrated our 10 years.
Oh, congratulations. Congratulations. In terms of the model that you've set up, what are some of the challenges you've had to overcome? I'm thinking about, permitting from the city, acquiring the land. What are some of the hurdles that you've had to kind of get over?
So this is Tabitha. On the operational side of things, the reality is we use a lot of donated land. The city of Eugene, for instance, a lot of park land that is unusable for other pieces. Churches and businesses allow us to set up on their properties. So we only actually own a few sites. We partner with our local municipalities and bodies of faith to bring these huts to wherever they're needed. Obstacle-wise, licensure is always an issue, but fun fact, Conestoga huts are actually vehicles. We come under the car camping program.
Interesting.
So it's very much an alternative method. It's that full spectrum of care. So you don't take someone straight from the street and stick them in a house. Sure. There's a learning process.
Sure. About how many, and give me the right term, what do you refer to people who are occupying those Conestoga huts? Are they clients? Are they
clients?
Clients, okay.
Or community members.
Community members, great. And about how many of the Conestoga huts do you have?
We personally manage 150 ourselves, and about 100 out there in the world that other folks are managing.
Okay. I imagine that sometimes you might run into, and this is another challenge more on the sort of the philosophical, the idea of NIMBYism, not in my backyard. What kind of conversations have you had to have with organizations to maybe, again, acquiring the land that you need or acquiring the space you need for them? What are some of the conversations that you've needed to have? And perhaps what have some of the outcomes been in terms of, we're going to do this, you might get some pushback, and then now that they've been up and running, what are some of the neighbors telling you now?
This is Heather talking. So interestingly, when we first started the program, we only had 2 sites that were set up, and they were not near any residential areas. So we didn't really face NIMBYism then. When we really started doing the outreach in the community and chatting with neighborhood associations was during the COVID pandemic, when we went from having a handful of sites to having over 14 sites all across the city of Eugene. And that's when we had to go and speak with different neighborhood associations, apartment complexes, housing tracts, things like that, to let them know we were planning on setting up a site with the city of Eugene and Lane County's blessing and request, really, because they knew that non-congregate shelters were the way to go during a pandemic. And so a lot of outreach was actually done when we first set up. So we went door to door and actually sort of campaigned for the type of project. And there was hesitancy at first. People don't know what they don't know. And when you talk about bringing in an alternative unhoused shelter, people assume that it's going to be a messy camp, that there's going to be drugs, that there's going to be alcohol, there's going to be crime. And I think we have been able to prove to the neighborhoods that we are a part of that that's not the case. Our communities are managed. We have a team that goes out there every single week. We have on-site volunteers. We have individuals that are working with our community members sometimes on a daily basis. And so it never gets to the point of being out of control. And we've actually seen a decrease in crime in those areas. We've seen an increase in community satisfaction. The area tends to be cleaner because our community members, the folks that are living in our safe spot communities, want their neighborhood to be clean, just like any housed person does. They want their neighborhood to be free of crime and free of individuals that are going to cause harm to them and their property and to others. And so, in fact, it actually ends up being a real positive thing for most communities to have one of our safe spot communities there.
Great. Where do you see yourself, your organization, fitting into like a multi-layered strategy around houselessness? Obviously, it's a huge concern in our community, throughout our state, throughout the West Coast. There seemingly needs to be a lot of programs put in place to sort of take a major chunk out of the problem that seems to get worse and worse. Kind of where do you see yourselves sort of as part of that overall solution?
This is Tabitha. We really see ourselves as that preparation time for folks coming from an unhoused space into housing. So they have time to acclimate to being around other people. Shared spaces is something that's really common for our folks to move on to when they do, get that permanent housing, but you have to start to acclimate to that. How do you care for 60 square feet? How do you care for a kitchen and cook for yourself when you've been eating hand to mouth for so long? So we are an essential step, and far from the only step needed, but absolutely essential. If you skip that preparation phase, we see it in our clients all the time. They hit housing and they bounce right back out worse than ever, and it's harder to get back to housing if you're not ready for it.
Yeah, it's interesting. For this program, I was talking to someone who went through the same kind of a program, and he talked about just having a door to close and how important that was.
Very much so. Safety is the primary concern, and it takes a long time to come out of the survival mode of staying up all night so that you can be safe. How do you keep your belongings safe? How do you find a bathroom? It takes a while to acclimate.
Well, what do some of your residents, some of your community members, what do they tell you about their experience? I imagine they've shared with you sort of where they came from and perhaps where they are now.
I would say this is Tabitha. I would say we get an incredible amount of positive feedback around the idea of community, having a positive space and group of humans to be a part of. And that is, I would say, aside from the one-on-one interactions with our staff and with volunteers, that safety piece is priceless. And be able to be around other humans and come back into your own, priceless.
I always think this, especially as Americans and as Oregonians, the idea of housing has, you hear about, kind of cliches like McMansions and just things being big. And I'm wondering, is the continued expansion, the continued success of the tiny home movement, including yours, which is, as you said, sort of that transition, Is it possible that we need to, as a society, kind of rethink housing along that just the very basics of size? That, we don't need to have enormous homes to be able to provide homes for everyone.
I think that we see with the housing crisis now, traditional stick-built homes will not be enough to get us out for decades, whatever they're projecting right now. So it's not about want. It is a necessity for our society to develop alternative methods.
Okay. My last question for you too is sort of, what's your plan for the future? Maybe the next 3 to 5 years, expansion plans, kind of serving more people. Talk about that.
This is Heather. So we're frequently asked that question, what are our plans for expanding? And our answer is we don't necessarily want to expand the number of shelters that we are managing. We feel like 14 is a pretty good number for us.
Okay.
We have staffing challenges just like a lot of other organizations are. 14 seems to be a good happy number for us. What we really want to do is we want to teach other organizations how to run alternative shelters like we have. We want to teach that intentional community piece. We want to teach how to have the functionality of a smaller community where folks are living together, working together, spending time together, creating those lasting bonds that are going to help move them from being unhoused to being sheltered to being eventually housed again. We can't do this alone. No one, like you look at the most successful people, they have others around them. They have people that are supporting them. They have friends, they have family. And that's what community supported shelters is all about, is creating those connections, either reestablishing them for our clients with their friends and family that they had before they became unhoused, or creating new connections for them within our safe spot communities or the community at large. So we really want to teach other organizations how to do this. We've been doing this for a decade. We have one of the best success rates in Lane County of moving folks from the streets into more permanent housing solutions. Over 95% of our clients report that they feel safer in our communities than they did on the street. We have all the data to back up what we're doing. And it's really that heart piece that is the hardest part to train, and that's what we want to teach other organizations to do, because the housing crisis isn't going to go away overnight, and our model is pretty cost effective. And if we can teach others how to run intentional shelters and intentional communities to support more and more of the unhoused folks that we have, I think that's at least a stopgap between, we're going into winter. We really need to get more people into shelter. So if we can help, that's what we want to do.
Indeed, indeed. Heather Quas-Anza and Tabitha Eck of the Community Supported Shelters Organization, really appreciate you coming in and talking with us.
Thank you.
I'm Michael Dunn, and you're listening to Oregon on the Record from KLCC and our show about tiny homes. The next two people you'll hear from suffered greatly from a life on the streets. One in Eugene and one in Portland. Both of these individuals thought their lives were hopeless until they found their tiny home opportunity. Paul Miller, a former resident of Opportunity Village, thanks for coming on and talking to us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, why don't you sort of talk about your experience of how you found Opportunity Village? Kind of what was your situation and how Opportunity Village addressed that?
Sure. So Opportunity Village came up when, just a little bit of background. I came up to Oregon in 2009. Had some health problems, couldn't really get work together. Excuse me. When so around 2015, I ran out of places that I could stay. Couches I could surf on, and friends had done everything they could for me, and I was appreciative. But that was, they'd done what they could do. I ended up at the Eugene Mission, which was fine. I was there for a couple months. While I was there, a couple of people recommended, hey, there's this place down the street that has these villages, et cetera, et cetera. And so one thing led to another. I applied, and it didn't take, it took maybe 6 or 8 weeks at the time to get in. And I got into one of the smaller Conestoga huts that they call them. And from there, that really shifted me, because I'm even though I'd spent time off and on over the years being homeless due to drug addiction and various social issues and behavioral issues of my own, mostly down in California. I didn't identify with being homeless. I wasn't comfortable being homeless, and I know that some people are, and I just wasn't one of those. So when I got to Opportunity Village, it gave me the momentum that I needed to carry on, take that next step to actually being housed again and becoming employed again and becoming a productive member of society.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe expand upon that of what Opportunity Village offered you at that time.
So the first thing is the security and the dignity of having a closed door, right? Of just having a key in your hand and a door that you can lock. A place you can put your stuff and put it however you want to in your place, and you leave and you come back and it's still the way you left it, that kind of thing. Those little things mean a lot, I believe, to somebody who's not used to that. And it doesn't matter how small it is, just that there was just enough room for a single bed and a couple of things along the side, and some clothes, just enough. But that really gives someone a little bit of energy, I think, and what it takes to feel good, in the core, down deep where it counts, and so that was the first thing that it gave me. It gave me a sense of safety. Another thing, that sense of security and safety for sure. The other thing that's really extremely important, I believe, and something that I still miss to this day, since I've left there, is the community, the sense of community, and that is. You can't put a price on that. And any community, there's challenges and there's going to be difficulties and conflicts and whatnot. But at the end, the big picture is that everybody is there for each other. When it all comes down to it, regardless of all the squabbles that go on in any community, everybody seems to have each other's back. And that really goes a long way to making somebody feel human.
Yeah.
Especially after many years of perhaps not feeling so human being on the street.
Okay.
For all that can be worth, sometimes.
Sure. And speaking of resources, I mean, we have an issue all up and down our community, all up and down the West, in many ways, of the fact that we don't have enough housing. And certainly housing affordability is kind of the foundation amongst all of our problems that escalate towards people who don't even have a roof over their head. I want to get your opinion, having lived there, kind of, and how it's helped you. Kind of give us your view of how the tiny house movement kind of fits into an overall possibility of a solution.
I think, personally, that the way that this particular organization and other tiny home communities have approached the housing issue is important. I do think that there needs to be everybody arrives at recovery or turning their life around, or however you want to phrase that. Everybody arrives at turning the corner in a different way, and some choose not to, and that's all fine too. But how these homes address it is it's number one, it's an affordable way. It doesn't cost the taxpayers. That's the model that we're talking about now anyway. And they're all over the United States and probably all over the world, but definitely in the United States. So that, first of all, they're functional, they're safe, they're clean, they're habitable, they're it's a healthy environment. And it doesn't cost the taxpayers. And that right there is a huge start to to making this a movement where, because this was a very small organization when they started Opportunity Village, and now they've expanded to helping many hundreds of people, if not thousands now. So, I mean, definitely over the years, thousands, but as of this moment, many hundreds of people are living in these facilities. And it's, I guess so what that does, it lends, it's a start. It lends a starting place to give someone like myself who's gone through there, who was able to put my life together and eventually buy my own place, which I never thought would happen, right? And now try to go back out into the community and talk about these issues, and maybe, it maybe inspire and at least educate to let people know that this is something that we can do. This is a solution that we can embrace.
Great.
Excuse me.
Well, Paul Miller, a former resident of Opportunity Village, and now you own your own place. That's great news. Thanks so much for coming in and talking to us.
You're welcome. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
Now you'll hear from an individual who thought their only solution was suicide, but now they're doing much better, in part by finding not just a tiny home, but a community. Runa Vidrasia of We Shine Village, thanks so much for coming on and talking to us.
Of course.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us about sort of how you found We Shine Village? Maybe talk a little bit about your situation prior to moving there.
I have struggled with depression and suicidal ideation for basically my entire life.
Okay.
So I was, prior to moving in, so I moved in last November, so I've been here for about a year.
Okay.
Prior to moving in, I had hospitalized myself due to my depression and suicidal ideation.
Okay.
I was in a very dark place. I had just ended a 9-year relationship, which happened that ended mostly due to COVID being a problem, and I had a suicide attempt in 2020. And that kind of really started breaking down our relationship, unfortunately. And so we broke up, and then I was couch surfing for a while and kind of ran out of places to go. Mm-hmm. And with my mental state as it was, I knew for a fact that if I had to try to live on the street, that wasn't going to be an option for me. I was going to do something less healthy
sure.
and more permanent. But at the suggestion of my therapist, I hospitalized myself and was admitted to Cedar Hills Psychiatric Hospital on October 31st of 22. Yeah. And through there, and through their discharge planner, they found We Shine and found information for that, and got me the paperwork, got me to sign it all up. And 2 days after I sent it in, I got a phone call from staff, and they were like, "Hey, how would you like to move in?" And I was like, "Yes, I would love to do that, because I'm really out of options, and that sounds amazing."
Yeah. When you got there, kind of, what did it offer you?
Well, in many ways, it offered me just a relief, like a weight off my shoulders in a way, because it was essentially like a spot to like land and take a breath and try to figure out what the hell was going on. Mm-hmm. And beyond that, it offered me a place to sleep, a place to keep some of my things safely, and access to food and whatnot, and that it really kind of took a lot of those pressures off, which then allowed me to start focusing on the other things that were really keeping me in the darkness, I guess you could say.
Is there kind of a sense of community about it?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like obviously when you first move in, it takes a little bit to like come out of your shell and, like start interacting with people because you're still just trying to catch your breath. But once you get past that, everyone is down to like talk and chat for, if they have time, of course. And we meet weekly for a village council meeting where everyone participates in that. And obviously with the weather changing right now, no one's really hanging outside as much.
Mm-hmm.
But during the summer, we would all sit around at like our central courtyard with a table that we had out there and some chairs, and we would sit and just chat for several hours and just hang out and just get to know each other and just be a community. And I can genuinely say that many of the people here I very much consider to be very good friends of mine at this point.
It sounds like, in listening to you, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you tell us, did this save your life?
Yes, it did. I have said that it's not an exaggeration that being here, coming to We Shine Village, definitely saved my life.
What do you think, God, if you were to meet someone on the street or something who maybe had similar circumstances to you, do you think that what you found, obviously very unique to you, of course, but do you feel like, this kind of a movement, the tiny homes, the village situation, do you think that that's, could become a bigger and bigger part of the challenge that our community has with people who are unhoused and who have struggles and need that sense of community?
Definitely. I think that the more options that there are for housing and for resources and whatnot, the more options and the more variation in those options, the better, because everyone's got their own unique needs. And trying to tell people, hey, this is what you need, and this is what we're going to give you, versus asking people, hey, what do you need? And maybe if we can't offer that, we can find you somebody who can. That's important. And obviously the main goal of this village is to have all of the villagers move into permanent housing.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that there's definitely space in our world and in our community to have small, like just micro villages that are more like permanent housing for people, that are just small communities that are very communal living and that have that sense of community. Because for some people, that's exactly what they need. Because if you think about, I think about all the times I have lived in apartments, I barely knew any of my neighbors. It was very much like I'd kept to myself,
Mm-hmm.
and I maybe knew the person like right next door, but I didn't really ever talk to them very often. And I know for some people that's not entirely the same, and some
Mm-hmm.
people do reach out. But having a space where like you are almost not necessarily forced to participate, but it's just a part of daily life that you're participating with other people, that can be a huge thing for people. And I know it's been a huge thing for me.
Runa Verdrasia of We Shine Village, really appreciate you talking with us and sharing your story. That's the show for today. Our dual crises of homelessness and housing unaffordability are going to take a massive collaborative effort with many tactics working in concert. Tiny homes are only one part of that collaboration, but they're a part that can't be underestimated. With creativity, neighborhood acceptance, municipal flexibility, and reimagining some land use, the tiny home movement can continue to provide a roof over people's heads and, more importantly, hope for the future. I want to thank my guests for coming on the show and talking with us. Annie Lowe, Urban Design Planner with the City of Eugene, Dan Bryant of Square One Villages, Heather Kwas Ansa and Tabitha Eck of Community Supported Shelters, and Tiny Home Village residents Paul Miller and Runa Verdrasia. This show, along with all episodes of Oregon on the Record, is available at klcc.org. I'm Michael Dunn, and this has been Oregon on the Record from KLCC. Thanks for listening.